When Daniel Parker got the letter from the lawyer's office, he didn't expect it to change his life. He was 32, living alone in a small apartment in Denver, working long hours as a car mechanic. His life was simple, sometimes too quiet, and most days he went home only to fall asleep on the couch. So when he learned that his late grandfather had left him an old wooden cabin deep in the forests of Montana, he was surprised. He barely remembered visiting the place as a child, but the memories were warm. The smell of pine trees, the sound of rain on the roof, and his grandfather's laughter while fixing fishing rods. It was one of the few happy things he remembered from his early years. Daniel decided to take a break from his routine and drive up there. It was early autumn, and the trees were turning gold and red. The mountain air was crisp and the long road curved through valleys and rivers. After hours of driving, he finally saw the sign for Maple Hollow Trail, the narrow dirt path that led to his grandfather's land. He expected to find a broken old cabin covered in dust, maybe even falling apart. But when he reached the clearing, he stopped the car and stared. The cabin looked alive. Smoke was coming out of the chimney. There were flower pots on the porch, the wood was polished, and someone had even hung a little wind chime by the door. Daniel frowned and got out of his car. He looked around, wondering if maybe the lawyer had given him the wrong address. But the mailbox had the same name carved on it: Parker Cabin. Confused, he walked up the steps and knocked on the door. He heard voices inside, laughter, and then the sound of footsteps. The door opened, and standing there was a young woman with chestnut brown hair tied in a loose braid. Her face showed surprise when she saw him. Behind her were 4 more women, all looking equally puzzled. Daniel blinked. Hi, he said awkwardly. I think there's been a mistake. This cabin belongs to my grandfather. Or, well, it's supposed to belong to me now. The woman at the door exchanged glances with the others before answering. You must be Daniel Parker, she said softly. I'm Lily. This used to be your grandfather's home. Please come in. Daniel hesitated, but the warmth inside pulled him in. The cabin smelled of baked bread and pine wood. It looked cozy, not like an old house at all. There were handmade quilts on the chairs, books stacked neatly by the fireplace, and the table was set for dinner. The 5 women watched him carefully as he stood by the door, still confused. Lily spoke first. She explained that she and her 4 sisters, Grace, Clara, Anna, and Nora, had been living there for almost 3 years. Their parents had died in an accident, and during a winter storm their car broke down near the valley. They were lost and freezing when Daniel's grandfather found them. He brought them to the cabin, gave them food and shelter, and told them to stay as long as they needed. The storm passed, but they never left. Over time, they became part of the cabin itself, helping the old man with cooking, gardening, and keeping the place running. When he passed away quietly one night, they stayed behind to care for his home because it was the only home they had. Daniel listened in silence. He could tell they weren't lying. Everything in the cabin had a woman's touch, and it felt lived in, not abandoned. The youngest, Nora, looked worried as she spoke. We didn't mean to trespass, sir. We just didn't have anywhere else to go. Her voice trembled a little. Daniel looked at her, then at Lily, then at the others. Each face was sincere, each pair of eyes carrying a story of their own. He finally sighed and said, You don't need to call me sir. And I'm not here to throw anyone out. I just wanted to see the place. Relief crossed their faces. Lily gave him a small smile and said, Then you should stay for dinner. Grandpa Parker would have wanted that. Daniel didn't have the heart to refuse. They cooked together that night, or more accurately, he sat and watched while the sisters moved around the kitchen like they'd done it forever. Anna was painting something near the window. Grace was feeding a pair of small goats outside. Clara hummed softly while setting the plates, and Nora stirred the pot of stew. Lily guided them all gently, her calm voice filling the air. It felt like a small orchestra of life inside that wooden cabin. During dinner, they talked. Daniel told them about his job, about how his parents moved away years ago, and how his grandfather used to send him postcards from this very place. The women shared stories about how they kept the land alive, the vegetable garden they planted behind the cabin, the old fishing spot they found by the river, and the nights they'd sit by the fire listening to his grandfather tell stories of his youth. By the time dinner ended, Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years, and belonging. Later, as he stood outside under the stars, the air cool and quiet, Lily came out with a lantern. "It's peaceful here, isn't it?" she said. Daniel nodded. "I forgot how beautiful silence could be," she smiled. "Your grandfather used to say that too." They talked for a while, about small things, how life in the city was too fast, how the nights in the forest made you hear your own thoughts. As they talked, the youngest sister, Nora, peeked from the doorway and said playfully, "So Daniel, are you going to live here now?" "Because if you do, you'll have to handle all 5 of us." The other sisters laughed, and even Daniel couldn't help but smile. He raised his hands and said jokingly, "I'll try my best." They all laughed together, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt his heart lighter than ever. That night, they made a small bed for him near the fireplace. He lay there listening to the soft crackle of fire and the sound of the wind outside. He thought about how strange life could be, how he came expecting an empty, forgotten house, but instead found a home full of life, laughter, and kindness. He remembered his grandfather's old saying, "Home isn't a place, Danny, it's the people who care about it." Before he fell asleep, he heard one of the sisters humming a soft tune in the next room. It sounded like something his grandfather used to hum when he was fixing the porch. Daniel smiled in the dark, thinking that maybe his grandfather had known what he was doing when he left him this cabin. Maybe he wanted Daniel to find something here, not just land or wood, but purpose. When morning came, golden light spilled into the room. The smell of fresh bread filled the air again. Nora was feeding the chickens outside. Grace was sweeping the porch, and Anna was already painting wildflowers near the window. Lily greeted him with a warm smile and handed him a cup of coffee. "You slept well?" she asked. "Better than I have in years," he replied. As he stepped outside and looked at the valley below, the mist rising from the trees, the faint sound of the river and the cabin standing strong, Daniel realized he didn't want to leave. Something about this place called to him. He didn't know what the future held, but deep down, he knew his life had just changed forever. He looked back at the cabin, where the sisters were laughing inside, and whispered to himself, "Grandpa, maybe this was your plan all along." That morning, the wind blew softly through the forest, carrying the scent of pine and warmth. For Daniel, the journey that started with a simple letter had led him to a place that wasn't just a cabin. It was a living story, and he had just stepped inside it. The next few weeks changed Daniel's life in quiet, unexpected ways. At first, he planned to stay in the cabin for only a few days, just long enough to understand what kind of place his grandfather had left him. But as days passed, he began to feel that he was not just visiting, he was belonging. The 5 sisters welcomed him with kindness and laughter, and the old cabin started to feel like home. Each morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of birds and the smell of fresh bread. Lily would be in the kitchen, humming softly while making breakfast. Grace would already be outside feeding the goats, while Anna painted wildflowers near the fence. Nora collected eggs from the chicken coop, and Clara, the quiet one, would sit on the porch sewing or reading. They all had their own rhythm, their own little worlds, but somehow Daniel fit right in. He began helping with everything he could. He chopped wood, fixed the roof, repaired the old water pump, and cleared the path that led to the stream. The sisters often teased him about working too much, but they appreciated every bit of it. Daniel was surprised at how naturally they all got along. There was no shouting, no arguments, only simple cooperation and care. Sometimes in the evenings, they would all sit by the fire. The warmth of the flames made the wooden walls glow softly. They shared stories. Lily told him how she once dreamed of becoming a teacher. Grace said she always wanted to raise animals. Anna talked about her wish to hold a painting exhibition someday. Daniel listened to them, fascinated by how strong and hopeful they were, even after everything they had lost. He started to feel protective of them. He realized these women weren't just strangers living in his cabin. They were family, not by blood but by kindness. He remembered his grandfather's gentle nature and understood why he had helped them. It was the same spirit that made Daniel stay. One afternoon, heavy gray clouds covered the sky. The wind picked up and the valley grew silent. Lily looked worried. "The storm is coming early this year," she said. "We need to bring in the firewood and cover the garden." Without hesitation, Daniel started moving. He and the sisters worked for hours under the darkening sky, securing everything they could. The rain arrived fast, heavy and cold, and by the time night fell, the whole valley was shaking with thunder. Water dripped from the roof and the sound of wind echoed through the forest. Daniel stayed up the entire night patching leaks, tightening the windows, and making sure the fire didn't go out. When the roof began to creak under the pressure, he climbed up in the pouring rain to secure the wooden beams. Lily shouted for him to come down, but he only smiled and said, "If I don't do this, the roof will fall by morning." By the time dawn came, Daniel was soaked and exhausted, but the cabin stood strong. The storm had passed, and the sisters watched him from the doorway, silent for a moment. Then Nora whispered, "You fixed everything. You saved our home." Daniel just smiled weakly and said, "No, we all did." From that day on, their bond grew deeper. The sisters began to treat him as one of their own. Grace made sure he ate well. Anna painted his portrait on a small piece of wood, and Clara quietly mended his torn jacket without even being asked. Lily, who often hid her feelings behind calm words, began to look at him with quiet admiration. Daniel started to feel peace he had never known before. The noise of the city no longer called him back. The world outside felt far away, unimportant compared to the warmth and laughter inside that cabin. Sometimes he would sit by the porch at night watching the stars reflect in the river and think about how strange life could be. He came expecting to find an empty house, but instead he found meaning. One evening after dinner, the group sat together as the firelight flickered across the walls. Nora leaned forward with her usual playful grin and asked, "So Daniel, how does it feel to live with all 5 of us now? Can you really handle it?" Everyone laughed. Daniel looked around at the smiling faces and said, "It's not about handling you. It's about keeping up with all of you. You work harder than I ever could." Lily smiled at his answer. "You've changed this place," she said quietly. "You brought back laughter and safety. Grandpa Parker would be proud." Her words touched Daniel deeply. He looked at her and replied softly, "I think he would be proud of all of you. You kept his home alive." Weeks turned into months. Together they rebuilt the garden, repaired the barn, and even added a small water mill near the stream. The cabin became more than just a shelter. It became a small paradise hidden in the woods. Travelers who passed by sometimes stopped to rest, and they were always welcomed with food and warmth. Daniel noticed how naturally the sisters treated everyone with kindness, and he felt lucky to be part of their world. As winter came, snow covered the valley like a white blanket. The air grew cold, but inside the cabin life was warm and peaceful. They celebrated the first snowfall by baking pies and singing old songs by the fire. Daniel carved small wooden ornaments and hung them on a little pine tree in the corner. It was simple, but to them it felt like a festival. One quiet night, when the others had gone to bed, Lily stayed by the fire while Daniel was fixing a chair. She looked at him for a moment before saying, "You know, when you first came here, we were scared. We thought you might send us away. But you didn't." Daniel smiled without looking up. "I didn't have the heart to. This place wouldn't feel right without you all." Lily nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You gave us hope again. We thought we were just lost people living on borrowed land. But now it feels like this is truly home." Daniel put down his tools and said gently, "It is home. For all of us." There was silence for a while, only the crackle of the fire between them. The warmth of that moment stayed in their hearts. It wasn't about romance or promises. It was about something deeper. Understanding, trust, and the quiet bond that forms when people share life together. By spring, the valley came alive again. Flowers bloomed, rivers sparkled, and the garden flourished with vegetables. Daniel and the sisters opened a small roadside stand to sell their crops and handmade crafts. Travelers passing through often stopped, drawn by the laughter they heard from the cabin. Many asked curiously, "Who lives here?" And someone would always answer with a smile. A man who inherited a cabin and 5 sisters who turned it into a home. Every evening, when the sun dipped behind the mountains, Daniel stood on the porch, looking at the golden light across the trees. The same peace always filled his heart, the peace of knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. The 5 women had once been lost souls, searching for a place to belong. Daniel had been a man searching for purpose. The cabin his grandfather left behind became the bridge that brought them all together. Whenever visitors came, they often asked Daniel the same question, half joking, half curious. "How do you handle living with 5 women?" He would just laugh and shake his head. "I don't handle them," he always said. "We handle life together." In time, people in nearby towns began to know them as the family at Parker Cabin. They helped travelers, hosted neighbors, and shared what they grew. The little wooden house, once lonely and forgotten, became a place of warmth and stories. On quiet nights, Daniel sometimes sat outside under the stars, thinking about his grandfather. He would look up and whisper, "You were right, Grandpa. Home isn't what you own, it's who you share it with." And somewhere deep in the woods of Montana, a cabin glowed softly through the trees and filled with light, laughter, and the sound of hearts that had finally found their way home.